Hello and welcome to another episode of Pennywise Pauper. I'm your host, Jake, and before we get to this week's deck, I have a short announcement to make. We are running out of Tier 1 decks. This is our 6th week so far, and there's only so many known decks in the format. So once we get through all the Tier 1 decks, we're going to start trickling through to Tier 2 decks and lesser known decks, but decks that people still know about. And we're also going to start accepting user submissions, so user submitted decks, user challenges such as try to break X card in Pauper, where X can be as bad of a card as you like. We could get some against the odds style Pennywise Pauper matches going on. And I'll also have some brews of my own to throw in there. I'm not taking submissions quite yet, but in a couple weeks I'm going to start officially taking submissions, so start thinking about what decks you want to submit to me to see me play. With that done, let's move on to our deck of this week, which is Blue-Black Delver. This deck makes use of two different kinds of Delve. The first is Delver of Secrets, which is often a 1-mana 3/2 flyer, and the other is the Delve mechanic. And we have Gurmag Angler and Sultai Scavenger representing the Delve mechanic. They are often 1-mana 5/5s and 3/3 flyers, respectively, in this deck. Next, we're going to look at the individual pieces of this deck and see how the deck functions. Starting with the creatures, you'll notice that this deck plays fewer of them than most other Pauper decks. Because of counterspells protecting our creatures from removal, we usually don't need that many creatures to win the game. We have 4 Delver of Secrets that flips over to a 3/2 flyer if you can reveal on your upkeep an instant or sorcery on top of your library. We have Stormbound Geist as a 1-of, a 3-mana 2/2 flyer with Undying that can only block creatures with flying. And we have the 6 Delve creatures, 2 Scavenger and 4 Angler, which get cheaper for each card you exile from your graveyard while casting them. Next, we're going to look at our card selection spells, and amazingly, these outnumber our creature spells. The 4 Thought Scour and 2 Mental Note fulfill the primary game plan of the deck, which is filling up the graveyard so that your Delve creatures cost less. Ponder, Preordain, and Brainstorm all help you flip over Delver of Secrets as early as possible, and also find whatever spells you need at the time. There's also 1 Gush, and I haven't been able to figure out exactly why it's in this deck yet. I find myself sideboarding it out a lot. The best of these spells is possibly Brainstorm, due to how well it works with the other cards in our deck. We can Brainstorm and put 2 cards we don't want back on top of our library, and then mill them off with Thought Scour or Mental Note. We can put 2 cards we don't want back on top of our library, and then crack in Evolving Wilds to be able to shuffle those cards away. Or we can Brainstorm in response to our Delver of Secrets trigger and put an instant or sorcery on top of our libraries so that we can instantly flip over the Delver to a 3/2 as early as turn 2. When combined, all these card selection effects fill up your graveyard for the Delve creatures, and then help you find whatever type of card you're looking for, whether it's a creature, a counter spell, a removal spell, or maybe even more draw card spells. Now we look at our actual interaction with the opponent. We're playing 8 counter spell effects, 4 actual counter spell, and 4 deprive. Deprive is generally worse than counter spell, but occasionally you can pick up and re-trigger a Dismal Backwater to gain an extra life, or put extra lands in hand so that you can hide them away with a Brainstorm. This counter magic is the most important piece of disruption. Being able to play a Gurmag Angler with a counter spell up is very good. Most decks have very few answers to a Gurmag Angler, and if you can counter the first answer that they have, it's unlikely that they have another. Next we have our removal spells. We have 2 Agony Warp, 3 Disfigure, 1 Diabolic Edict, and 1 Doomblade. It appears as though our removal is all over the place, and it kind of is, but the fact that we have so much card selection in the deck helps us find exactly the removal spell that we're looking at any given moment. The mana base consists of 4 Dismal Backwater, because gaining life is great against aggro, 4 Evolving Wilds, because it puts a card into your yard for Delve, 1 Mortuary Mire, which can rebuy a Gurmag Angler whenever you need another one to cast, and 9 Basics. The split of Basics is interesting with 8 Island and 1 Swamp, because we don't have that many more blue spells than black spells in our deck. However, the imbalance in favor of islands is necessary because, as I mentioned, Counterspell and Deprive are among the most important pieces of disruption in our deck, and being able to hold up in Counterspell or Deprive on turn 3 or 4 after playing a Gurmag Angler is very important, and having the double blue mana is necessary for that. Having only a single swamp is a little bit of a liability since we mill ourselves. So far, I have not Thought Scoured myself, flipped over my swamp, and then been unable to find a swamp with an Evolving Wilds, but I would not be surprised if it happens at least once during the league. Next, we come to the sideboard. We have 2 Annul, 3 Dispel, and 2 Exclude to change up our counter magic suite depending on what types of spells that we need to counter from our opponent. Annul is good against Affinity and Journey to Nowhere decks. Dispel is good against opposing counterspell decks. And Exclude is good against expensive creature decks. Also on this page we have 2 Nihil Spellbomb to take out opposing decks that care about the graveyard. While the most common sideboard card against graveyard decks is Relic of Progenitus, Relic does exile both players' graveyards, which makes it not good for us since we want to fill up our graveyard for our delve spells. So instead we use Nihil Spellbomb for our sideboard, which is targeted. Next in our sideboard we have 1 Agony Warp, 1 Doomblade, and 2 Shrivel to help us alter our removal suite to match whatever types of creatures our opponent has. And finally we have 2 Stormbound Geist. Against any deck that's not running Journey to Nowhere, and also isn't aggressive enough for us to care about the fact that Geist can only block creatures with flying, this creature often demands 2 removal spells from our opponents. That's the Blue-Black Delver deck in theory, so let's get to the games and see it in practice.